All right. Hello, welcome to the Health Coach Collaborative podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the effects of nutrition and the other three pillars of health on chronic diseases and how you can positively affect them.
One of my former students told me an incredible story. She's a bit older than me, and back in the 70s, she had a naturopath who, at the time, there wasn't a lot of scientific evidence behind naturopathic practices or medicine. So she did a 10-day water fast, which would never happen today. But back then, 10-day water fast. And she explained that the first couple of days was brutal. She thought she was going to die. But once she got past the first couple of days, she was coasting through and she felt really good and had lots of energy. And at the end of the 10 days, she said her skin was clear, her eyes were clear, and there was no body odor. She'd wake up in the morning, her breath smelled just fine. And this went on for years, really clean, until she had a massive car accident, needed a blood transfusion. And her words were exactly this. She said, I woke up the next morning with the worst breath and body odor that I could ever remember having. And of course, now at this point, now she's in her 30s or then, and she couldn't, detox again. Her lifestyle was just too complicated to do a cleanse like that. And she wouldn't anyway, but just the before and after and the differences really made an impression on me. And that just, I think, supports the power of cleansing and detoxification and clearing your detoxification pathways and actually taking the time every year or every couple of years to go through a detox to keep your body healthy and clean.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because you said it would never happen again, but I do know some naturopathic doctors who do practice 5-day water fasts. And I've seen there's a medical clinic, I think it was in California somewhere actually, that does 30-day water fasts. And obviously you have to go there and stay, and they take you through a whole cleansing process before you start it, but it's a 30-day water fast that's in a clinic, usually used for people who have extreme health conditions such as cancer or obesity or something, and nothing else has worked. But same thing, you see these really crazy transformations in terms of how their body is after. And one other thing too, that I had a friend who's reading a book on cellular memory. And so people who have had blood transfusions or even transplants of other organs having memories. One example that she told me was somebody had a liver transplant and the guy had been in a car accident or a scooter accident and had lost his life. And when the person woke up from surgery, she had the memory of the person in the accident. And then she found out later that that is where the donor had passed away. And so it's interesting to hear your blood transfusion story in terms of, where did that blood come from and how, let's say, clean or detoxified was that person and how it affected her overall status of detoxification in the long run. Is it the memory of the cell that is so deep? It's so deep within the cell that we just don't understand it.
Mm-hmm. That is such an incredible story, Lynn. It was only recently that I was listening to a podcast. A couple of naturopathic doctors were actually having this discussion about cellular memory and talking about how it's a new field of science that's just beginning to open up. And there is actually medical research trying to comprehend how this is even possible. So it'll be interesting. I'm so excited to see what science and medicine will be a decade or two from now, with so much new understanding about genetics, about how we can actually change our genetics, which is something that, 20 years ago, it was unimaginable. About cellular memory, about the microbiome. There's a tremendous amount of research going into these areas right now that is totally going to change our approach to health, and nutrition is always going to be a huge part of that. And it's a very exciting time. But going back to what you were saying about the supervised detox, yes, I think if you did it that way, where you were in a clinic and it was supervised and everything, that all your activities, were accounted for, that's very doable. With our own clients, it's very challenging, as sometimes clients will ask if I could supervise an intensive cleanse like that. And I am a little reluctant because unless I'm there with them to monitor their activity, you know, I don't want them operating heavy machinery or driving a car if they're water fasting. And not to mention that so many of us are absolutely depleted, even if we're eating a healthy diet, or, you know, the nutritional quality of our food is like deficient compared to what it used to be, of course, as we know. But they're so depleted that a fast will just sometimes put them over the edge even more so. And in some ways it's worth it, but in many other ways it's not worth it. So what kind of detoxes do you supervise detoxes with your own clients?
I only recommend a detox if I think that they have repleted themselves enough prior to. And I usually find that when somebody does a transition from a standard American diet, say over to a more holistic approach, let's say, often they'll do a little bit of detoxification anyways during that process. And for me, I find most people are depleted. And so doing a fast is just depleting them more. And it's actually counter to what we're trying to achieve. And so I tend not to recommend detoxification. I do them myself, but that's because I know how to do it. And I know that activity levels have to come down, and there is a way of doing it where you are making sure that there's enough nutrients coming into the diet, you know, a juice fast or something like that, that is a little bit easier to do than a water fast.
Absolutely.
But I think there could be clinical reasons to do a more extreme fast. I mean, people have been doing them for thousands of years, so there is some basis there. And back to your point about, you know, what's coming forward in the scientific community, what was seen as, I'm going to use the word woo-woo before, you know, even 10 years ago, what we would have been told has no scientific basis is now being shown to have scientific basis. And there is reason to do some of these practices. So it will be interesting to see what comes to light in the future as science grows and research grows, and some of these maybe less known practices are researched.
100%. And, you know, my husband and I have this conversation at least once a month because, oh my gosh, being in this business now in this industry for about 25 years, I have had an opportunity to see that come to fruition where, you know, I remember learning 25 years ago about gut dysbiosis and its impact on chronic illness. And at the root of inflammation is so often from the gut. You know, we have bacteria and microbes that are out of balance, and a preponderance of unhealthy microbes living in the gut, and how they can create inflammation, and that can cause autoimmune diseases, and it can lead to even heart disease and skin conditions like psoriasis and eczema and all kinds of chronic diseases. And at the time, after I finished school and started teaching, my students would go to their medical doctors and say, you know, my nutrition teacher told me about candida, or at the time we didn't have the term dysbiosis, we had other terms. Oh, and my doctor said that there's no such thing as this, and that it was absolute nonsense. So, you know, how do you address that? I thought, well, you know, you can listen to your doctor, or you can try this protocol that I'm recommending, you know, try changing your diet in this way and just see how you feel. And 2-3 years after hearing those exact words over and over again, you know, my doctor said there is no such thing, or this is nonsense. Suddenly there were clinical studies published on candida. Suddenly there was more information about the gut microbiome and how imbalances could lead to this and that and the other. And now that information, of course, that field has absolutely exploded. Just this week alone, there were the WHO started warning us about aspartame, you know, and this has actually been going on since I think March, that the WHO has been warning us about not just artificial sweeteners, but even some natural sweeteners like the sugar alcohols, but especially the artificial ones. And, you know, when I co-wrote Unjunk Your Junk Food, like 13 years ago now, we were warning back then about the dangers of aspartame and sucralose and ACE-K, and we were met with so much resistance. Oh, there's no clinical evidence. That's nonsense. We looked at over 5,000 studies, but it was like all, you know, now you look on the internet trying to find information about the dangers of these artificial sweeteners, and they're on page like 12 or 13 on Google. You got to really dig for that information. So I'm so glad to see that this is coming out now. So Yes, I think we were years ahead of our time, and I love that science is finally catching up and finally appreciating that there's so much more to the body than what science has just told us there is. That everything is connected, and when you address chronic illness, you can't just address the disease. You can't just take a medicine or a supplement or a specific treatment. You need to address the whole body on every level. You need to address the emotional side of illness. You need to address sleep and movement, activity levels, exercise, what is suitable for that type of activity, you know, what gets the lymph flowing so that your body can clear infection. How do your stress levels promote or support the condition that you have? You know, can you modify your stress levels? Can you delegate some of your activities and your work to be able to take that time to heal? There is a lot more to chronic disease than just treating that illness with a medication.
Which is unfortunate, because that is the way that the allopathic medical community does approach illness. And that's my experience. And I can share a bit about my own story, but I do feel, kind of back to what we were talking about on the detoxification, and you even mentioning, you know, the conversations that you've had with your husbands or your husband, not multiple husbands.
He'd be mad.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure he would. But I had the same conversation with my husband, who is obviously within the scientific community and the fitness side. And we talk a lot about that too, is practices that address all of these things, cellular cleaning or detoxification within the body, the movement that's required, like you said, to move the lymph. These are all scientific practices that were used by, let's say, yogis in the past 5,000, 7,000 years ago. And it's things that we think that they innately knew, but maybe yoga is seen as a science from 5,000 or 7,000 years ago. And so what they already inherently knew is now coming to the forefront of what we know our bodies need in order to actually have these cellular cleaning processes work. And so, you know, the movement, meditation for stress, supporting your mitochondria, getting proper sunlight, detoxification, you know, cleanses were a big part of a lot of yogic practices back then as well. And so this science, if we pair it with the science that is coming out today, we're starting to see that there is truth to these things, and it's not just woo woo. And I haven't been in the field as long as you, but it was the same thing for me. There are many things that were kind of at the forefront of what was being taught to us, but people rejected. And I think it's important to kind of come back to the fact that it almost takes 20 years for the scientific community to actually come back and say, yep, that's actually correct, and we were wrong about this. And we can see that for eggs are bad because they have too much cholesterol, fat is bad. Well, some fats are bad. Some fats are pro-inflammatory, and some fats actually reduce inflammation. And so it's waiting for the scientific community to catch up. Or if you go digging, like you said, can we find the proof that's there that is maybe on the breaking edge of science? And can we continue to see that pattern moving forward?
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you talk about the oils too, because we've just done like a flip. Right. I mean, it's interesting how diet trends promote the scientific research, right? So up until the keto diet, you know, maybe even paleo diet, saturated fats were the bad guy. We had to avoid them at all costs. And instead we were eating polyunsaturated oils because they were heart healthy and cholesterol free and free of saturated fats. And now we're exactly doing the opposite. Now there's so much evidence showing that the seed oils are so dangerous. This is what the heart associations were promoting for decades to keep us cholesterol free and healthy. Have the rates of heart disease gone down? No, it's still the number one killer. It's still the number one chronic disease, all kinds of cardiovascular diseases. And is seed oil a part of that? Probably, you know, it's pro-inflammatory. So cholesterol is like one small part of the picture. There's so much more to look at. So when I was in school, like, again, oh my God, it was so long ago, but we were told by our teachers that exactly what you said, Lynn, like it takes 20 years for the scientific community to catch up. And I just assumed that with the internet and with East and West commingling on the internet and so much travel and information spreading worldwide now, and it's at our fingertips, it's still taking 20 years. So, it's just shocking and mind-boggling that we're still at that point, but we're getting there incrementally. We're getting there.
Well, and also to our point of today's podcast, what is causing chronic illness or disease? And when we talk about that, we can talk about chronic disease being heart disease, diabetes, obesity, certain cancers, autoimmune conditions. Going off of those, yes, there are genetic factors, but they play such a small percentage in the causation of disease, and how these lifestyle factors that we've been talking about for the last few minutes actually play a key role in the development. So we can say the epigenetics, and how those genetic factors might actually play out. And so as we see these diseases growing, unfortunately, exponentially over the last 20, 50 years, with the change of food and the way that we eat, and these unhealthy recommendations, don't eat fat, or eat these fats instead, or don't consume salts, or omit this food and add this food in, and that tends to be the way that it goes. And of course, it's a lot of marketing and a lot of greenwashing that goes along with it. But let's dig into how a lot of these diseases are lifestyle diseases, and how we live our life right now is contributing to it. So based on nutrition, and then obviously our other pillars of stress, movement, and sleep, and how those actually play a role in the development and sometimes the reversal of disease.
Mm-hmm. And you said it, epigenetics has been a game changer, because now we know that even if you are programmed genetically with a disease, there is something in your family, you don't need to turn those genes on. You can keep those genes turned off, so you never have to experience the disease. And that is determined by your lifestyle, your sleep, how you deal with stress, your exercise. Exercise is just as important as nutrition for fighting many diseases. And for lifestyle, and to improve sleep, and to improve stress levels, etc. So yeah, like we have options now. We didn't think we had these options years ago, and now we know that we can control whether or not, to a degree anyway, whether or not we succumb to those diseases. Yeah, so let's talk about the underlying cause of some of these. Like, what is it that we can do or not do to prevent chronic disease? And like you said, cardiovascular diseases of all kinds, and stroke, diabetes, all types of diabetes, chronic respiratory diseases like COPD, asthma, mental health disorders, arthritis, and other pain diseases. There are over 100 forms of arthritis. Osteo and rheumatoid are probably the most common. All forms of cancer, kidney diseases, neurological diseases, obesity, and chronic pain. These are our top 10 chronic illnesses, and they cover hundreds and hundreds just in those 10 categories. So can we say, change your diet, change your lifestyle, and you can fight most of these diseases? What do you think?
Well, that's my experience. So I obviously I'm going to follow the science and follow what people's experiences are and see what's happening, because like we said, it can take 20 years for the science to actually catch up. So what are the, I'm going to say, anecdotal experiences of people, and what I see in the work that I do and the work that my husband does is that they are definitely manageable through lifestyle shifts and changes. And I think the closer that we get back to a natural state, the more human we can feel, and the better that we can feel. And that's for somebody who has chronic pain, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammation, and all of the bigger things that you talked about, I have found that moving away from an allopathic approach and more towards a natural approach, I can manage things much, much easier with a natural approach than I could with just, I'm going to say, band-aiding it with medication or with steroids or with some of those things that are offered through the medical system. And back to the power of coaching, even, is when I was dealing with an allopathic doctor versus an integrative medicine specialist or a functional medicine doctor, the idea was to, well, you're just going to have this for the rest of your life. You have to deal with the symptoms. Your whole life can be turned upside down, obviously, from these conditions. And we're just going to give you some medication to Band-Aid the symptoms that you're having. And my question was always, what is causing this? Why am I experiencing this? Is it too much stress? Is it lack of sleep? Is it inflammation in the grand scheme of things? Is my metabolic system or metabolic health just backwards, and I need to just kind of retrain the system, let's say, which would be right down to mitochondrial health, in my opinion. So I am of the opinion that, in my experience with clients and myself, they are reversible. We can see lots of documentaries about this too, where people, move away from a standard American diet that does have many unprocessed foods, sugar, the wrong kinds of fats, processed foods, etc. And then they move towards a whole food diet and are able to reverse whatever it is that they're experiencing. And that is true for diabetes, obesity, cancer. We've seen, for me, again, autoimmune conditions. Can you put your things into remission? And I do think it's possible. I don't know what your experience is, but that is mine.
Absolutely. It's been my experience, not only with my own health, but with, and of course, obviously with clients, but also even just friends and family members who have been diagnosed with various conditions. I just had a conversation a few weeks ago with a friend of mine who was having issues with her retina, and it was diagnosed, and the only treatment was surgery. And this was last summer, but she changed her diet. She was into perimenopause, and she wanted to change her diet to help her adjust, her hormones adjust. And by changing her diet to a more natural diet, taking out processed foods, eating healthier fats, omega-3s, less sugar, that was the game changer for her. As she cut sugar out of her diet, her eye issues improved. And when she went back to see her ophthalmologist, there was no issue with her retina. It was resolved, which was a surprise to her doctor. Not so much to her, though, because she had seen other issues in her health resolve. Her sleep improved, her stress levels improved. So if we look at the big picture, because obviously we need to isolate the cause of each and every disease in order to understand it. And our program dives into many different health disorders and the underlying or the direct causes and the etiology and just looking at the changes, the cellular changes, the hormonal changes, et cetera, whatever causative factors there are. But underlying those, we can even generalize and say that the majority of health problems are caused by inflammation in the body. Would you agree? So not all, 100%. Obviously. Yeah, not all, obviously, but the vast majority. And the more we learn about inflammation, the more we understand inflammation, the more we see how it is related. So even if it isn't directly causative, it triggered reactions that resulted in whatever condition has been diagnosed. So if we take that as our premise, our starting point, with any chronic condition, assuming that inflammation is at least part of the problem, it would make sense in order to address that condition. Treating inflammation would make absolute sense. As you said, allopathic medicine offers a Band-Aid approach. They deal with pain management or symptom management. Like, let's try and treat the symptoms so that you're not in pain so that you can function during the day. It's not curative for the most part. Very few treatments are actually curative. So it's really up to us and up to the patient to dig deeper and get to the root of the problem, the actual etiology, and try and resolve it from there. So if we take inflammation as our starting point for chronic disease, with nutrition, there is a tremendous amount of change that can happen by, number one, avoiding those factors that cause inflammation. So like sugar, bad fats, processed foods, ultra processed foods, unhealthy forms of sodium, etc. So the diet part. And then, like you said, the lifestyle factors. getting more sleep, prioritizing sleep, which is something that especially our generation just never really prioritized. We're starting to appreciate it more and more. Dealing with stress, oh my goodness, like cortisol, that word is thrown around so loosely, but I really believe, based on experience with my clients, that people just underestimate how much havoc cortisol actually causes in the body. And then movement, like yesterday I had 10 clients. I literally sat from 8 a.m. until 10 p.m. This morning I woke up feeling like I was 100 years old. I can't go a day without, and I even had a 20-minute walk in between, but I can't go a day without some kind of movement, but without getting my heart rate up. Like I need to, in order to function well. The body needs to, for lymph flow, for circulation, for cognition, like for cleansing and detoxification, for sweating through your pores. Like that is an absolute necessary part of life. So all of those lifestyle factors and diet, of course, can address inflammation. So maybe we can dive in and pick those apart a little bit.
I think back to the nutrition part too, is that there's a lot of micronutrients that we're missing too, which plays a downstream effect on how well our cells function and our enzymatic function and our cleansing of oxidative stress, which we are going to dive into. And then maybe lack of phytonutrients too, if we're eating a lot of processed food with sugar, which are anti-nutrients, and we're depleted in everything, whether we're looking at nutrition, sleep, movement, stress. We're depleting ourselves continuously throughout the day. High caffeine too. We're just compounding, our lifestyles are compounding the issues that add to this inflammatory state that we are in. And we don't, in my opinion, we don't need science to show us this, because if we just look outside, we can see that people are getting unhealthier as time goes on. And I think it's a little bit worse in North America. Me living over in Europe, it's not as pronounced. I was looking at the sugar consumption of the United States and Canada in comparison to, say, France and Switzerland yesterday with my son, actually. And Americans eat twice as much sugar as Europeans or as French and Swiss people. And so when you look outside here, you don't see the amount of people once you obviously work with enough people, you know what an inflammatory state looks like. People look unwell, they look maybe a little bit gray, more gray hair, obese, those kinds of things. And these are the conditions that we're seeing become more and more prevalent. So I think there is a lot at play here. So yes, let's talk about some of the positive things that we can do within our diet to combat some of this inflammation that we were talking about.
I think the first thing is just looking at the diet, because we were talking about detoxification earlier, and you were saying that there's like all sorts of ways to detoxify. One way to detoxify is just to remove the sugar from your diet. Like even if you change nothing else, just write down what you're eating and circle all the sources of added sugar in your diet. I'm not talking about fruit, but I'm talking about soft drinks, sodas. Like that's got to go. There is zero health reason to include soft drinks in your diet. That's so easy to replace with water with a squirt of lemon, water with some chlorophyll, water with some cucumber and some fresh herbs. Like any of those are flavorful, delicious, and much better option than a soft drink. Even juices, purchase bottled or canned juices, there's no need. The reasons we drink juices in the first place is for the vitamins, for the enzymes. Those are only available in the juice if that juice is pressed right away and consumed right away, or pressed fresh, and consumed right away. When you purchase a bottled juice, there's very, very little nutritional value. And basically what you're getting is sugar, and usually the equivalent amount of sugar that's in a soda. So that's an easy one. Take that right out of your diet. Look at all the other areas of sugar or sources of sugar in your diet, cookies, pies, cakes, like donuts. We eat these foods like it's so normal for us to consume these foods when it's really not. The human body was not designed to eat so much sugar, and even our taste buds our taste buds they're designed naturally to recognize very sweet tastes and obviously to enjoy them. But the sweetest taste that we should ever experience is the sweetness of fruit, like say pineapple. Anything that's sweeter than that has an effect on our brain cells. It triggers addiction. It triggers changes in our brain that are almost similar to what a drug addict experiences when they take drugs. So it does become a big picture problem, because you may very well be addicted to sugar for many reasons, not just because of the effect it has on your brain, but also your blood sugar, your blood glucose levels, of course. So there are many reasons to eliminate sugar from your diet. Sugar stimulates the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines that leads to inflammation, triggers inflammation. This doesn't happen over weeks or months. This happens within an hour. It happens in minutes. So, and I've certainly noticed that when I have an injury, if I eat sugar, that injury, I can feel it. It's worse. Even something like a glass of wine, like a glass of red wine, if I have an injury, I feel it worse the next day if I have wine, so there is no question now, and we have loads of scientific evidence supporting the role of sugar in inflammation and the sugar in chronic health.
Well, and I think it's important to say, like you said, the taste buds will change back to finding things that maybe you didn't find quote unquote sweet before, because you're getting these hyper palatable foods quite often, which are the salt, the fat, and the sugars, right? So when you're eating all of those things, that's almost, let's say, clouding your taste buds. And when you eliminate these foods, your taste buds kind of go back to recognizing things that are naturally sweet as being really sweet. So for example, cutting out sugar, my experience is that when I cut an apple, I can only eat half an apple because I find an entire apple to be too sweet. And of course, these have been hybridized to be actually more sweet. So it's actually really interesting to see how your taste buds change over time. And also the reaction of the body, as you said, when you play around, for example, with a glucose monitor. I've done this. I love experimenting with these other little ways of looking at our diet. And so we eat too often. And so if we're eating things that are highly processed or full of sugar or highly refined, and we're eating as often as we are, our blood sugar stays raised all the time. And so we're just constantly ticking the inflammation box up and up and up. And of course, I think over time that does compound. And so back to kind of those detoxification things that we were talking about is when we can almost put a break in between the foods that we're eating and the time in between our meals, and then also shifting what we're eating. I think it does help, stabilize that the sugar spike or the blood sugar spike, and then keeps the inflammation at bay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's easier said than done sometimes. Like to your point about how your taste buds will adjust, anyone who used to put sugar in their coffee and now they don't put sugar in their coffee, that when you take a sip of coffee with sugar, it's disgusting. Like you can't drink it anymore because your taste buds have adjusted. And it's exactly as you said. When you start removing sugar from your diet, you notice just how sweet foods actually taste, and also how salty if you're removing or lowering the sodium in your diet. So do it gradually. You don't have to do it all at once. If you can't do it all at once, start removing certain things, replacing them with better quality sugars, with honey, with maple syrup, with more natural sweeteners, with even monk fruit, or whatever more natural sweeteners, until you can get to that point where you can take it out, even if it's just for a period of time. Consider it a detox. And especially when you are inflamed, when you're feeling the pain, your arthritis pain is worse than it was a week ago, when you're having a flare up, that's when you really need to emphasize eliminating sugar and replacing it with other anti-inflammatory ingredients, like one of my favorites, omega-3.
The omega-3s have played a huge role, I think, in my well-being. Do you want to explain maybe how omega-3s are anti-inflammatory, and which omega-6s, for example, are, did I say anti-inflammatory? Yes. So the omega-6s are inflammatory or pro-inflammatory?
Yeah, so omega-3 fatty acids has been researched since the late 1960s for so many different things, for cognition and learning and memory, for behavior, I mean, when you think about our brain structurally, more than 60% of our brain tissue is actually fat. And I just can't resist saying that, yes, we truly are fatheads, but we can support brain health with putting in, with putting literally the raw materials, omega-3 fats, right back into our bodies. But more than that, every cell of your body has a membrane that is heavily reliant on fats. So it's imperative that the fats that we intake, the fats and oils that we put into our bodies, are supportive of the cell membrane for cellular transport, for things to get out of your cells and things to get into your cells, like nutrients. And the other thing that's of key importance is that omega-3 is one of the most anti-inflammatory substances that we know of, because when you intake omega-3, it causes short-term hormones called prostaglandins to be produced. And these happen within seconds of intake. And prostaglandins are anti-inflammatory. So they help reduce the inflammation regardless of what kind of inflammation that is. A really good example was years ago, a colleague of mine who was allergic to dogs came into a household that we were working in, and they had a giant dog, and right away she just started, like, she couldn't breathe. She broke out in hives. It was a very bad allergic reaction. So we gave her 2 tablespoons of omega-3, and within 10 minutes, her symptoms disappeared entirely. Now, again, very anecdotal. That was her experience. It doesn't mean that it's the same is going to happen to another person, but it was very fast. And she was actually able to stay there for several hours afterwards and work, thanks to the incredible impact of the omega-3. So it's fast acting, key for so many different functions in the body. But here's what we need to understand. First of all, omega-3 is one of the most deficient nutrients in our diet, because what are the sources of omega-3? Cold water fatty fish or algae, certain algae. How many of us eat cold water fatty fish numerous times a week in order to get the recommended amount of about 1,000 milligrams a day? Very few people. Almost everybody has an omega-3 supplement in their house. But when I speak to my clients, it's like, oh yeah, I think there's some in the back of my fridge, right? Like, we forget to take it. There is some in flax and walnuts and some nuts and seeds, but you also get a lot of omega-6 with those. So we don't even recommend flaxseed oil anymore like we used to, because the more we understand about omega-6, the more we recognize that we're getting way, way, way too much omega-6 and not nearly enough omega-3. And that disparity is causing health problems. It's one of the factors in chronic disease, and it's causing inflammation in our bodies. So where are we getting all this omega-6 from? Well, omega-6 is readily available in different foods. So avoiding the 3 C's, cotton seed oil, canola oil, which has a reputation as being heart healthy because it's a monounsaturated fat. It's not as healthy as we think it is. And corn oil, which is in so many different foods. Even health foods, like I'll go to the health food store and I'll pick up a container of hummus. Second ingredient is canola oil. It's in so many salad dressings. It's in a lot of different health foods. Okay, what else? The 3 S's: soybean oil, which is again in thousands of products, sunflower oil and safflower oil. Also grapeseed oil, not the healthy organic grapeseed oil. You can still use a little bit of that, but the processed grapeseed oil that's usually used in restaurants, and also sometimes rice bran oil, which is often used in restaurants. These are oils that we want to avoid, because again, even though we've been told for decades that they were healthy because they were cholesterol free and didn't have saturated fat, they're actually not. They are an underlying reason for the inflammatory response that's going on in your body.
Well, and they're a processed food, and we have to try and remember that, is that when we look at the food that we're eating, where does it come from? And we can say, okay, cold water fatty fish is great for us, but given the state of our marine situation, a lot of the fish that we're getting now, even in the stores, those are raised in farms and places where the fish are maybe not raised in the most healthy situation as well. The same for factory farmed meat. Studies are starting to come out showing pasture raised meat being high in omega-3s and lower in omega-6s, and then meats that are raised in confined feeding lots are the opposite, high in omega-6s and low in omega-3s. And obviously, if we go back to the quote, we are what we eat, the same thing is true for the animal. If the animal is eating unhealthily and they're eating a lot of corn and soy and grains, which they're not meant to be eating, they're going to be unhealthy and they're going to be in an inflammatory state as well, which is why I think that we tend to see the omega-6s being higher in those meats. So I think, yeah, looking to find the more natural sources of foods that are intact with these healthy omega-3s. Another thing that I really like is cod liver oil. I think it's a great source of fat soluble vitamins as well as the omega-3s. So that's another option as well. I know you said supplements and people usually forget them, but I do find that those just pack a nice punch. So yes, I think that there's the omega-3s for their antioxidant properties, but there's other antioxidants or anti-inflammatory things that we can be consuming. For example, do you want to dig into maybe phytonutrients and other antioxidants that we can find maybe in fruits and vegetables that help with inflammation as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The research actually has been quite consistent about the power of antioxidants. And interestingly, like getting antioxidants from supplements has a small effect, but getting antioxidants from food has a big effect. And the more antioxidants that are in your diet from a variety of foods, the better supportive they are of your overall health. And clinical research often refers to the Mediterranean diet because of everything we talked about, more fish,
nuts and seeds, olives.
Nuts and seeds, yeah. And I mean, we were just talking about like seed oils, but eating the raw nuts and seeds in their original state is exactly how you want to eat them when they're fresh, before they've gone through that massive processing experiment, really, that results in those unhealthy, toxic seed oils. So raw nuts and seeds, whole grains, but not a lot of wheat, but like a lot of original grains. When I used to visit my grandmother's little village in Greece when I was younger, she grew everything there. Like she had her own animals, livestock. Her milk came out of her goats. If she wanted something that she didn't have, she would trade it with another farmer. Yes, it was a long time ago, but they were still living a very natural lifestyle in this very progressive world. She didn't even have a garbage can. There was no garbage. Everything was recycled or repackaged or used in some way. So we have so deviated away from that lifestyle. So thinking about, incrementally going back there and again, our food used to be much higher in antioxidants. And what do antioxidants do? Well, they combat oxidation. So if you think about an apple, you cut an apple open, you leave it exposed to oxygen or the elements, it's going to start to brown. It's like it starts to rust. And the same thing is happening to our cells and our organs every second of the day. In fact, your brain oxidizes faster than any other organ because it uses more oxygen. And this is why we're starting to see, dementia. Like as an aging population, this is frightening because we're seeing more and more cases of early onset dementia. So our number one best defense against dementia is a high antioxidant diet. And that's just one example. The same goes for all of our organs, for all of our cells. So where are we getting antioxidants from? Okay, colorful fruits and vegetables. Very few antioxidants in grains. Like buckwheat has some, but not a lot of grains have antioxidants. Lynn, are you aware of any antioxidants in meat or animal protein?
Well, that's actually a really interesting thing because I have a friend who teaches a master's nutrition program in France, actually. And we were talking about the carnivore diet and what his thoughts were on it, because we see a lot of people going onto a carnivore and an animal-based eating regime, let's say, and them seeing a good reversal, let's say, of disease over the long term, and people have stayed on this diet for a long time. And so I asked him what his thought was on just staying on that, and he's of the opinion that there does have to be some addition to, let's say, greens or rainbow vegetables and fruits to supply the antioxidants that we would need. That being said, raw milk is high in omega-3, has a whole bunch. We could say some vitamins and minerals are antioxidants as well, right? We could say that. So given the fact that if we're eating it in its natural whole state, like I said, the grass-fed meat is higher in omega-3s. And so I do think that there is anti-inflammatory properties in animal products. Do I think they're phytonutrients in the same way that we find them in plants and vegetables? I don't think so, but I do think that there are anti-inflammatory properties based on the vitamins and minerals and maybe some of the enzymes that we find in whole, well-raised food.
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. Vitamins A and beta carotene, which is the precursor to A, vitamin C, they have antioxidant properties. Vitamin E is a very powerful antioxidant, and many minerals like iron and zinc, they have iron antioxidant properties. You're 100% right. As far as fruits and vegetables, though, this is where we're going to get those phytonutrients, like the bioflavonoids, for example, the citrus flavonoids. You know, these are they operate in different ways. Every antioxidant will have slightly different properties and different functions. And when you think about antioxidants in plants, their purpose is to protect the plant from everything that's around it, you know, to protect it from erosion, wind and soil erosion, to protect it from insects, to protect it from predators. So the same properties that are protecting the plant, when we eat those plants with those antioxidants and phytonutrients, they have similar effects in our own bodies. So, and one of those effects is reducing inflammation. So back to where we started. But to your point about the animal foods, this is so relevant and so critical because sugar, as we said, is highly inflammatory, and grains can be very inflammatory for people. And just when you work with clients and you start taking the sugar and some of those grains out of their diet and replacing it with more really high quality animal foods and fruits and vegetables, primarily, and some fruit, you see such a shift, and very, very quickly. You see a very fast reduction in inflammation, very fast healing, reduction in symptoms, things like their skin will clear up, their energy is lifted. And a part of that goes back to the microbiome, because, you know, if we're going to assume that a lot of inflammation originates within the microbiome, what's feeding those bad microbes, those unhealthy microbes that are causing disease in the first place? Sugar, starch, you know, like our processed foods. The more we eat those carbohydrates, the more we feed them. And when we feed them, they proliferate. And it's not like you have weeks or months. One bacterium today could be like millions or even billions tomorrow. We don't have time. That's why every single meal counts. Every single thing that you put in your mouth counts. It will have an immediate effect. You might not see it immediately, but it does have an immediate effect. So again, to reduce that anti-inflammatory response, it's actually not that hard. It's a matter of replacing the processed foods, the sugars, those unnecessary carbs and grains with more whole natural foods, with more naturally raised proteins, with more vegetables that are colorful and rich in antioxidants, and getting that omega-3 in your diet. Even if you just did that, you would see a tremendous change in your overall health picture. And that's before the lifestyle changes.
Well, and I think that there's something to say for seasonal eating too, and that's almost the next step. But that being said, is I've been doing some studying on, you know, obviously sun is part of it, but the way that the sun interacts with your microbiome and how the microbiome can depending on where you live, whether above the equator or below the equator, can really play a huge role in how your microbiome actually digests some of these foods. So people living below the equator where there's more sun can tend to eat more carbohydrate rich foods, still recommending whole foods here, because their microbiome is in tune with the sun, which is a really interesting way of thinking about it, because people who tend to live north of the equator if we look more back at traditional diets, even just 100 years ago, people, I have a Czechoslovakian background, so they eat a lot of potatoes and rye, and then fish and meat, and not a lot of carbohydrates in the grand scheme of things. And given the climate, if we go back to seasonal eating, in the winter, we wouldn't be able to get a banana, naturally speaking. They wouldn't grow in our area. And so picking the foods that are growing naturally at that time of year can help us kind of come back to what our bodies naturally are needing during that time. Winter is cold, we need more protein and fats. Summer is hot, we need lighter, more maybe carbohydrate dense foods. And so that's another kind of way of thinking about where our food comes from, because if we get down to the basis of it, the food that we are eating is not natural anymore. It's highly processed, it's highly refined, and we are seeing that reflected in how our bodies are reacting to it, because it's not something that we would find naturally, and our bodies are not evolutionarily equipped to deal with food that is made this way.
Yeah, that is so interesting, actually, and it reminds me of the blood typing diet, Dr. Diadamo's blood typing theory from like 20 or so years ago that was largely discredited by science, but I use it a lot in my practice because I find it to be a very interesting guideline. And I think there is more to what their theory involved at the time. And I think what you're suggesting here is probably a very relevant part of that. And the idea was that depending on where your ancestors came from, like if they came from more tropical climates where there were more plant foods available year round versus a colder climate where there weren't a lot of plant foods available, but there was more, they were hunters and lived more of a hunting lifestyle that required a lot of endurance to locate the animals, to catch the animals, and like managing to store food for those cold winter months. You could determine what overall diet type would work best for your body based on your ancestry. So my family, my genetics is Mediterranean, and I've always done really, really well on a Mediterranean style diet. So I love beans, I love plant foods. I'm also a type A blood type. Type A's make the best vegetarians, and I was a vegetarian for a very long time. I am not any longer. Nonetheless, like it was the vegetarian diet that actually transformed my health completely until it didn't. After many years, I was deficient, but it was a learning process, right? And your body changes too, so you need to be able to adapt with your body's changes. But I find that my clients who are type O blood types, so genetically they would come from colder climates and more hunter-gatherer societies, they do really well on animal diets like paleo or keto or an Atkins style diet, animal food diets or higher protein, animal protein diets. But the sugars and starches are so destructive in their bodies. And when they have a lot of sugar in their diet, they tend to develop diabetes. They tend to develop blood glucose problems, dysbiosis, even faster than someone who's, say, a type A or a type B blood type. So it'll be interesting to see how all these theories merge in the future, and how science, because they will, eventually science will incorporate these into, genetic testing or trying to come up with the best individualized diet for each person. And that's where science is going. On all levels, science is going towards individualized nutrition, individualized lifestyle planning. So this whole, food guide or overall recommendations that are generalized to populations, that's not going to fly any longer. In a few years from now, we will have the option of having an individual plan based on our genetics, based on our ancestry, based on our lifestyle, based on all the factors that are relevant to us personally. And that's how we'll be making our diet choices. And I'm super excited for that to happen.
Me too. And just back to your point, I'm an O negative blood type, and I thrive on an animal-based diet. Like I said, my ancestors, at least on my father's side, are from Czechoslovakia, but even British heritage that I have on my mother's side, it's the same thing. It's a lot of lamb, it's a lot of animal-based products with the farm raised foods like root vegetables and salads and things like that. And that tends to be what I do best on. The minute that I start diving into eating too many grains or eating too much sugar or anything of the sort, that is definitely when my chronic illness kicks up, and I will see a massive increase in inflammation. Even the ability to open and close my hands with my arthritis, it's exactly that. And I do think that there's something to be said too for the microbiome when we talk about genetics and epigenetics too, who's controlling who here almost. And back to your heritage of being from the Mediterranean, if we go off of the microbiome is passed on to the child, right? So your mother, or I'm not sure who came from Greece, but if we look at your heritage,
both my parents.
There you go. So if you look at your heritage, and the microbiome of the mom is passed on to the baby, as we start to kind of understand how that plays a role in it, we really do see how these processes kind of come into play. And we haven't really talked about it yet or on this podcast at all, but mitochondrial health and how that plays a huge role is, if we think about how mitochondria is in every cell of our body. And something that's really interesting is that when we learned biology in school, you see the cell with this single mitochondria in it, which obviously has a lot to do with energy production and cellular respiration and oxidation and how this all plays a role in the body. But really, there's hundreds of thousands for example, in a brain cell, I think it's 200 to 300,000 mitochondria are in one brain cell.
Wow.
So it's incredible to start thinking about what our connection is to the mitochondria and how that plays a huge role, and how we can positively affect the mitochondria, which is kind of more based on, obviously food and nutrition play a huge role, but the lifestyle factors. I'm going to say one more thing and then we can start talking about those. But the base of all of this, which is what our program is based on, is self-care. Taking a moment to take a step back and just, these changes don't have to happen all at the same time. Like you said, you don't have to change all your meals to be perfect, quote unquote, changing one meal at a time and then making your journey progression over time. I mean, I will speak for both of us here. I mean, my nutrition journey is now at 10, 15 years, and it's progressed over time as my understanding has changed. But just taking the moment to realize that you are going to pay for this in the long run. If you take care of your body, it will be a positive payment. If we don't start taking care of our body and our environment and how we raise and grow food, we will pay in the long run with disease. Let's dig into some of those other lifestyle factors too.
Mm-hmm. Let's maybe start with sleep. Yeah. So up until maybe the last decade, we've really, especially in North America, I'm not sure how it is in Europe, but I think it might actually be a bit better in Europe, because the last time I traveled Europe, people were still taking a siesta at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And depending on where you are, I guess in Europe, I mean, not to mention that it can be so hot in the afternoon, but there was a couple of hours where shops would close down and everyone would go home and have a nice big relaxing lunch and then a little nap, and then, go back to work or go back to, whatever it was they were doing. Not the case in North America, where, we've got a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 5 schedule. And I think the most common complaint that I have with clients is that sleepiness, that huge dip at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when they go running for the vending machine or for an extra cup of coffee or for some sugar, right? Because that's when we're supposed to be napping, whatever you are doing in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., which is getting your deepest sleep, you're supposed to be doing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's based on the circadian rhythm. So We've underestimated the value of sleep. We work hard, play hard. We sacrifice sleep if we have to work, if we have to go out, if we want to watch the rest of that Netflix movie. It's an easy sacrifice. And even when I worked for a police service about 12 years ago, I left that job to have my children. I was the nutritionist there. And even though we were starting to talk a lot more about sleep, and the research was coming in, it wasn't really a priority. You know, the officers I worked with, they had bad shifts. It was more like, let's just deal with these bad shifts rather than let's try and find ways to help you sleep more and have better quality sleep. Now there's a lot of new research linking sleep with disease, even just as the one factor. And let's talk about sleep and diabetes. Even 10 years ago, there was research showing like they would take a bunch of 25-year-old healthy males, not diagnosed with any chronic diseases, and deprive them of sleep, 4 hours of sleep. So they deprive them of 4 hours of sleep. They only got 4 hours of sleep. Within 1 week, every single one of them was pre-diabetic. And that study has been repeated numerous times. There is no question that sleep affects your blood glucose levels. We have entire chapters in our courses on how sleep affects blood glucose levels. And even one night of disrupted sleep can mess with your blood glucose. Not only your blood glucose though, then there's your sleep, your appetite hormones, leptin and ghrelin. I really noticed this when I had my children, you know, for the first couple of weeks after having babies, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, Lynn, is like, I just wanted sugar. I was so tired and I just wanted sugar because you were up every hour the night before to feed. And the next day I just my appetite was completely out of whack. And I was tired up and down all the time until I got control over that. So sleep as far as blood sugar management, and we know that when your insulin is not working the way it's supposed to, that in and of itself can lead to chronic illnesses, even outside of diabetes. So insulin is a trigger. It's another trigger for chronic disease, even heart disease, pain management, pain diseases. So getting that sleep just to control your blood sugar, to control your appetite. And then of course, for literally everything else, like for your mood, for your emotions, for just coping, for your cognition and focusing at work or on any other tasks that you're doing during the day.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing an increase of, or let's say a decrease in sleep caused by all the screens that we are in front of all the time and not properly having a good sleep routine. So putting the phone away, de-stressing a bit, and then making sure that the sleep aspect is forefront again at the self-care. Is it that you need time to decompress and so you're hopping on a show after work because you've done your work and now you deserve to have a show? Cool. Do it before the sun goes down so that you're not getting this imbalance in light. Yeah, exactly. And my experience is that my autoimmune condition was triggered by one of my kids having colic. And so I got no sleep for almost a year, no proper sleep for almost a year, being up in the middle of the night, having all of these things disrupted. And I'm almost certain that that was one of the triggers for my autoimmune condition. And I have spent, well, now 9 years trying to reverse that. And so it's something that I talk a lot about, is making sure that we have the support that we need in order to get proper sleep. And whether that's the proper environment, whether that's support because you don't have a baby who sleeps, whatever that is, it's just making sure that there are things in place that allow you to get good sleep. Putting blinds up. Oh my God, I put blackout blinds up for the first time since Canada, I think in 4.5 years. And I was waking up at 6:30 with the sun, which is fine, but we put those blinds up and I slept until 8:30. So I obviously needed it. And it was obviously something that we should have put in place a while ago, but it has played a really crucial role in me feeling a little bit better. So yeah, really interesting when we come to sleep. So that's, I mean, the basics of sleep, we can obviously talk about it, but let's dig a little bit into exercise,
Mhm.
in terms of how that can affect inflammation and movement and lymph function and
How about
movement.
mitochondrial function? Do you want to talk a little
Right.
bit about that?
Yeah, I'll just share my experience again with that, and just my husband deals with mitochondrial health for elite athletes and athletes at a non-elite level as well. And essentially, he uses exercise to help build mitochondria in order to have better oxidase, to be able to use oxygen better, which helps people perform better. And so what we're seeing now is we thought, okay, well, if we can increase mitochondrial health through exercise for athletes, can we use this? And what is the research, obviously, to help combat chronic inflammation and disease and things like that? So if I started doing zone 0 to zone 2 work, which everybody can dig into if they want to, which is just low intensity cardio, like walking or cycling at a low intensity. If I use that, how does that affect my chronic fatigue and my pain levels as in my own personal experience? Do we see a positive improvement? And over the last year, we've been slowly working on it, and my endurance is slowly going up. So my chronic fatigue is almost reversed. My pain is reduced. I'm getting stronger. I can now walk up the stairs without being completely winded or needing a nap for that matter. And so exercise plays this crucial role in obviously increasing mitochondria within the body, but also helping with this cellular respiration, oxidative stress, and clearing those things out. And so I think exercise, we used to have a debate, my husband and I, on, is it nutrition that plays the bigger role, or is it exercise that plays the bigger role? And I really do think that these 4 pillars that we're kind of talking about right now play equal roles, and they need to be part of our daily routine, because we've lost, if we look at the hunter-gatherer cultures, for example, that will walk 10 to 12 to 15 kilometers a day to get the food that they need. And this is part of our evolution with mitochondria. If we remove that walking process from our lifestyle, what are we doing? And we're actually kind of reducing the part of our body that actually helps us have energy and life, actually, because without them, we wouldn't have life.
Wow, that is so fascinating. It's and you know, we tend to think of exercise, again, it's our work hard, play hard, society. We sit all day long, and then we go to a gym where we're paying a membership so that we could sweat and raise our heart rate and work our butts off for an hour to take a shower and then go right back to our sedentary lifestyles. Like, is this how we're supposed to live? I don't think humans evolved this way. When I'm
No.
talking about my grandmother living in her little village, like, she was active all the time. She lived to be 103 years old. She died in her sleep, pain-free, disease-free, with black hair, like never dyed her hair a day in her life. And she had calves like a bodybuilder because of all the walking up and down the hills, and like drinking spring water that was rich in minerals. And like, I'm so happy that I got to see her in her lifestyle, in her environment, because it always made me feel like this was how humans were meant to live, and it was such a neat experience. I don't think there's too many places in the world now where you can see people living like that anymore. But I don't think this is what we're meant to do, so we're meant to be physical consistently throughout the day. And something that came out of the pandemic was some interesting research about how, if you don't have time to work out for an hour consistently, then break it up, where you set your alarm to get up every hour and do something, even 2 or 3 minutes a day, like jumping jacks and squats. And after a year or so, the research came back showing that this was actually a more healthy way to live than to do a full hour of intensive exercise, because you're breaking it up throughout the day. You're promoting circulation. You're getting that blood flow to your brain, so you're more productive in your work. You're more efficient. You're thinking more clearly. Exercise is so important also for weight management, because obesity is one of the big factors behind chronic disease, obesity and overweight. Something that we don't hear enough about is all the inflammation that happens around your belly fat. So you could be one of those, skinny fat people where you're very lean, but you've got some fat storage around your internal organs in the belly. Those fat cells are different from the other fat cells in your body because they actually produce inflammation. They are inflammatory, and they also duplicate and replicate faster than fat cells in other parts of your body. And the faster they spread, the more inflammation you end up having throughout your entire body. When I used to go to Metagenetics seminars, there was a saying that some of the instructors used to love to say. They said, inflammation anywhere is inflammation everywhere. And that really stuck with me, because inflammation in your belly means you're going to have inflammation in your gums, like gum disease, inflammation in your brain, inflammation in your arteries, inflammation in your joints. It's going to spread. It doesn't stay in one place. And that's why when you go in for to get your inflammatory markers measured with like a CRP test, they don't tell you exactly where that inflammation is. They just give you an overall grade, like a level of inflammation in your whole body, because it doesn't even matter where it is. If there's inflammation in your body, it needs to be treated. And exercise helps reduce the risk of obesity. It helps reduce your body fat. It helps control your body fat. It helps control your weight. It's important for your sleep. Like you said, Lynn, when I was fresh out of school, I got a job working at a chain of fitness clubs in Toronto, and I went in there. I was hired as a nutrition director, big job. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make such an impact here. And all these people who are sick and dealing with chronic illnesses, once they get their diets turned around, like, I'm going to fix everybody. Client after client after client would come in and say, oh, well, I had high blood pressure until I started exercising, and now my blood pressure is normal. Oh, I had issues with my blood sugar, and then I started exercising, and now my blood glucose is normal. Oh, I had, like really bad arthritis, and now my arthritis pain is gone, or I barely feel it. And I sat there with my jaw on the floor, recognizing for the first time that you're absolutely right. Exercise or movement is just as important as nutrition. And now, we have added on stress management and also sleep. They are all part of that health picture. You can't just focus on one without the others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we have to dive into stress too deeply. I know most people know that they're stressed, and stress doesn't just have to be the stress that we feel from our job, the stress that we feel from, outside environmental sources or whatever it is. It can be stress from the food that we're eating. It can be stress from medications that we're putting on our body. It can be the side effects from sitting down too much. That's all stress on the body, because if we look at what our body needs, if we go back to what the human body physically needs, and we can use your grandmother, which is also my experience now that, I'm gardening more and building this food forest and things like that for myself, the more we move, and Sean and I saw this a lot over the pandemic, Sean being my husband, we saw this over the pandemic too, is that now we can't go a day without going outside and going for a walk, because our cognition is better, our mood is better, we're more creative in our businesses, we're capable of solving more problems because we're taking that time to do the things that are quote unquote human and what we actually need and what our body needs at a cellular level. And all of these things, the pillars of health, all contribute to how our body functions. And the lifestyles that we're living now, the 9 to 5 and the weekend warriors and all of those things, are very stressful. They're completely opposite to what we're used to, and maybe not used to now, but evolutionarily speaking, our bodies have not caught up. And so we're kind of at this kind of crossroads where we have to make the decision of, how do we want to feel in our body? What is the most natural way that we can live, while obviously fitting within a society that doesn't necessarily compute that that's what we need. I'll just end it by saying, if you want to know more about natural nutrition or our program, head on over to healthcoachcertificates.com, where we dive into these topics in depth. You can find out more about nutrition, chronic disease, lifestyle factors that can positively affect your health, the digestive system, the microbiome, and coaching as well. So if you're interested in diving deeper into these subjects, head on over to check it out, and comment below and like and subscribe to our channel.